with the notes template just so that we can see what all's going on. Let me get it brought up real quick. So here we go. There. Okay. So from the pages that I uploaded of the history, people's history of the abolitionist movement, the first big thing, there were 4 real big events that pushed the North and South apart. And that's what your whole learning goal was to be able to explain what those 4 events were and why they were so included. That first one was the Fugitive Slave Law. So after reading through your pages, who would like to, what did y'all get about this Fugitive Slave Law? What exactly was it?
I got orders was the slaves to deliver up from labor when they are requested by slaveholders, and it helped the Underground Railroad, and it was a lack of ordinance against the North and South. Okay,
so it was a law that was passed that required anybody in the North to return escaped slaves, like you mentioned, that had escaped from the South, but also when it was talking about how it was effective, or how did it affect free African Americans in the North, how did that, I think I heard you mention it maybe.
I said the Underground Railroad.
It did help the Underground Railroad because it brought about more awareness of what was going on. So this helped the abolitionist movement, but it also, for like free African Americans in the North, those who weren't even slaves, were being targeted by slave catchers from the South. So these slave catchers from the South would come up from the South and just come into the North. So like they would come into, for instance, Pennsylvania. I think it mentioned it in the Harriet Tubman movie. I don't know if we got this far, but they would come up and essentially steal or kidnap free African Americans and return them to the South and just take them and sell them back into slavery. And they would say, oh, they didn't have their papers proving that they were free. And the one other thing I wanted y'all to make sure you knew was that anybody that was caught, like the Underground Railroad, anybody that was caught helping an escaped slave could be imprisoned. They could be sent to prison for that. Did anybody else want to share what they had for, or add anything else that they haven't discussed? Okay. How did the Fugitive Slave Law further separate the North and the South? So your discussion question, how did it further separate it? What did it result in?
Didn't it result to like some people, if you help the slaves escape, you go to prison? So maybe it helped like a movement between the North and the South. So didn't the North have slavery too?
The North, at that point, the majority of the northern states had outlawed it. But as we're going to learn in one of our other lessons, this prejudice still existed. So while it was necessarily outlawed in the North, there was still that prejudice and racial feeling of white superiority in the North. But there were still abolitionists that helped to help escape slaves. There was many instances, like we saw in our notes, of like Elijah Lovejoy, William Lloyd Garrison, Charles Sumner, who we're going to talk about later, who's my hero. They helped bring about this movement. So after this Fugitive Slave Law passed in 1850, it helped to further separate the North and the South because it showed this shift in the abolitionist movement from just like, signing a protest or signing a petition to more violent acts. They were more taking an active role in fighting back against the South and fighting back against these laws that they thought were unconstitutional. So it helped further separate them because they saw that that they shifted, this abolitionist movement shifted from just protesting to we're taking direct action to prevent this from happening. So these abolitionists, like you mentioned, Desiree, in the North that helped the Underground Railroad, they were taking means of violence to prevent free African Americans from being taken back to the South. So they were fighting back against these slave catchers.
Mm-hmm.
Did anybody else want to share? I know there's another group of us. Okay, so the next one is this 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. So somebody that maybe hasn't shared yet, what did y'all get? What was this Kansas-Nebraska Act?
Didn't it create the territories of Kansas and Nebraska?
Yes, it did. So it helped create these territories of Kansas and Nebraska. But what was the big controversial thing about those new territories? What was having to be decided?
Wasn't it the choice of slavery?
Yes.
It's like not do slavery and do it, basically.
Okay. Yes. Did I hear somebody else I want to add into that or add on to that?
I was gonna say the same thing.
Okay. So very good. Both of y'all are on the right, are perfect. So this Kansas-Nebraska Act, they decided that these new territories were going to be added to the United States, Kansas and Nebraska. And they had this new thing that I think it was mentioned in the reading called popular sovereignty. So it was where the people in those territories had the right to vote whether they wanted slavery or not, whether they wanted to be a slave state or not. So they wanted to decide whether to have a slavery in these territories, but it started to, what did this act provoke? So this Kansas-Nebraska Act, anytime that you have people being able to vote one way or another, and especially something that's so controversial as slavery, what do we notice today when people are voting? Do people just go, yeah, I'm going to go vote for this, or do they get like really energized and you hear people essentially lose their minds? So, do what? I'm sorry?
I said the second choice.
Yeah. Like, today we have people saying, check the news each night and people blame each other for every single thing. I think the wind blew, at 30 miles an hour and Trump blamed it on the Democrats. But so this act, what did it provoke in these territories? It started out as just being a political difference. So they voted two different ways, but it kind of escalated into something else. What did y'all see? They mentioned the first time we ever hear about John Brown was mentioned with this.
Was it the war? I don't know which war. Was it the Civil War?
We're not there yet. This is like a lot of people would actually make the argument that this is the first shots of the Civil War in many ways, because it was kind of like a premonition of what's going to come, or a foreshadowing of what's going to come. But it took me back to 9th grade English. But so it started out as they were supposed to just vote two different ways. They were supposed to just vote whether they wanted slavery or not. But soon people from all these other states started pouring into the territories, and it ended up, what started out as political differences turned into all-out warfare. So pro-slavery and pro-freedom groups started having wars. It was called Bloody Kansas. So they actually started having wars against each other. And so that was the first time that it mentioned John Brown, who we're going to talk about in a minute. He led a group of people that went through and started essentially killing pro-slavery people. So John Brown's going to be really controversial on how people remember him, depending which side people sided with during the Civil War.
Mr. Move, didn't two parties split and create two other parties to help each other?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Didn't two major political parties split to help create another one?
Yes. So around this time, we started seeing the Republican Party form. Officially, it formed in 1850 to 1851. So before we had the Democrat and the Whig Party. Do y'all see how, does that show up real time when I'm typing?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So before we had the Democrat and the Whig Party, but then because of slavery, there were some Democrats and there were some Republicans that were against slavery. But then there were some Whigs and some Democrats that were still for it. There were still some that were against it. And so this third party got started that I think was mentioned in the reading called the Liberty Party. And so they were kind of free soil party. They were against slavery on every aspect. So these two parties joined together, the Whig and the Liberty Party joined together to form the Republican Party in 1850. And that's when we first saw like the first people like John Fremont and Abraham Lincoln started running as a Republican around 1852, 1854. And they are complete opposite of what the Republicans are today. So fun fact, essentially the Republicans and the Democrats switched around 1960. But anyway, did that answer your question, Zanaya?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool.
What was that?
I was about to say, shoot, I didn't know you was gonna have you screaming at me, but okay, cool.
I'm sorry, but can I join back? Oh, she's crying at the moment.
Oh no, I'm just messing with you. So we saw with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, how did this further separate the North from the South? So with these parties starting to take arms against one another, what did it show that these abolitionists were now willing to do?
They're willing to kill?
Yes. So these abolitionists were willing to kill anybody, were willing to kill to stop slavery, to end slavery. So we saw for the first time that people were willing to take up arms against other Americans, were willing to kill other Americans to end slavery. So no longer were they just like, oh, slavery's bad, we need to stop, or oh, we need to sign a petition. No, they were like, okay, you want to keep slavery and you want to bring it into these other new territories? No, that's not going to happen. We'll kill you. Stop it. So it's showing these slow but sure evolution of the abolitionist movement. Okay, so we've been able to cover so far 2 of the 4 events that helped further push apart the North and the South. Are there any questions before we get going any further? Okay.
Wait.
So,
I have one
yeah.
question. Okay, my computer audio broke up when you guys were talking about the Fugitive Slave Law. So, the audio broke up on the separate the North and the South?
Okay, so the Fugitive Slave Law, it helped to separate the North and the South, because this was the first time that the abolitionists were not just protesting, they were like taking active ways of resisting the South. So they were taking these active roles of like Desiree mentioned with the Underground Railroad, to further separate from the South and resist slave catchers, essentially. Does that help? Okay. So the next one we're going to talk about is Dredd Scott v. Sanford. So this is a Supreme Court decision, Dredd Scott v. Sanford. What did y'all get about what was the actual decision that was made by the Supreme Court?
Then he declared the government couldn't free slaves as they were property.
Exactly. So you mentioned that the government they essentially viewed slaves as being property, so they couldn't be protected in the United States. They weren't considered citizens. So this was the Supreme Court. So literally the highest office of the land that's supposed to base their decisions on the Constitution that says all men were created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain rights, they're now saying that slaves equal property. So they considered slaves to be property now. So they didn't have the standing as a human, and so they didn't have any say-so in court. So this guy, Dredd Scott, what did y'all find out about him? Who exactly was he?
Wasn't he a black man who thought he should be free, him and his family?
Yes. So he was a slave from in the South, and he was taken into what state?
Was it Missouri?
Yes. So he was taken into Missouri, and it was considered a free state at the time. And he said, because I crossed into a free state, I should be considered a free person. Also, the guy that technically owned him died. So he said, because he died and I was taken into a free state, I believe that I should be able to sue for my freedom. So he sued for his freedom, but this wonderful Chief Justice Roger Taney, what did he end up deciding that what did he say about the Constitution? That's what I'm mainly wanting y'all to get for number 6.
Didn't he say that blacks could become citizens?
Exactly. So he said, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
But I was saying, it doesn't like really make sense because like, even though he was free at the end, he died 2 years later. So I'm saying, what he did all that if he died 2 years later?
It's enough to really tick you off, isn't it? It's ridiculous. Like, it blows my mind how people tried to view the Constitution. Like, the Constitution clearly says all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain rights. So it leads me to wonder, they're taking all of these, passing all of these laws, all of these policies, all of these steps to ensure that slaves can't escape and that slaves are able to be punished. Like Frederick Douglass said in his 4th of July speech that we looked at last week, he said, there's so many different ways that a slave can be executed or put to death for a capital punishment, but how are they not considered humans then? You know, they're considered property, but yet you're passing laws to go against them. It blows my mind. And it's so contradictory. So essentially, Taney decided that the Constitution couldn't limit the expansion of slavery. It had no jurisdiction or no way to limit the expansion of slavery. Good morning, Mr. Cole.
Good morning.
So we are on the discussion question about Dredd Scott v. Sanford right now.
Okay.
So we've seen that the Constitution couldn't limit slavery, that slaves were considered property. So how did Taney's decision, this is open for anybody, how did Taney's decision help further separate the North and the South in y'all's opinion? So how did the Supreme Court ruling that slaves are property help further separate the North and the South?
Like,
In your read,
them more mad, like the North.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I guess like it kind of made the North more mad because like it's like every time they take a step forward, they get pushed back by the government.
It would make the North really mad because essentially, who had more power now? Not only was the Fugitive Slave Law passed, but now they had the Supreme Court decision. So who had more power, the North or the South?
Wasn't it the South?
Yes, the South had a lot more power now because essentially white supremacy, or the belief that slavery could exist, became the law of the land for the whole United States. So now the entire United States had been ruled, or it had been ruled that the whole United States was free and open to slavery. So this white supremacist view of slavery being right now just became the law of the land. Okay, this is the last one we're getting to. It's John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. So this is really honestly fascinating to me about John Brown. So he came about during this Kansas-Nebraska, Bleeding Kansas is what it was called, during 1854. It was a war between pro-slavery and pro-liberty people. So John Brown, what did the reading say was so ironic about him sneaking into the South?
Well, I said that it made the people mad, and didn't they say that he was a terrorist, like the first U.S. terrorist?
A lot of people in the South believe that he was the first, I guess you could say, domestic terrorist ever, because he kind of tried to lead an insurrection or rebellion. But it depends on which view you take of him. If you're a slave owner, yeah, you view him as a terrorist because he's trying to end your rule, essentially, or he wants to take what you consider property. But if you're an abolitionist, he's a hero to you. He didn't accept the status quo, and he said, no, this is wrong. There's no reason that another human should own another human being. And everybody else, like Abraham Lincoln's fine just sitting there letting it happen, and I'm going to take matters into my own hands. But what was so ironic about it was that, slave catchers, they could legally go into the North to take back slaves, thanks to the Fugitive Slave Act. But John Brown, it was considered illegal for him to go south and free slaves to bring them back up north. So it's ironic because slave catchers, they were allowed to go up north and just take as many slaves that they considered slaves as they wanted, and it wasn't illegal for them to do that. But then John Brown, it was illegal for him to go into the South and try to free slaves. So it's kind of like a kind of hypocritical, which crazy, the entire time of slavery was hypocritical. But anyway, so we get to his ultimate plan at Harper's Ferry. So first off, what was Harper's Ferry? Did anybody from the reading?
Wasn't it a military base, something like that, where they had all the little weapons and stuff?
Right. It was a military base over in Virginia. So it was this military base that housed all the weapons for the U.S. military in what was considered then the South. And what was his plan of going there?
Didn't he want to ambush the military? And didn't they want to ambush and get the slaves from the South to the North? Well, he had, I think it was 14 men with him, something like that. He had some people with him, and I think they just wanted to ambush the military.
You're right. You're 100% right. He wanted to ambush this military base. So he and a group of men wanted to take control of the military base to get their weapons. And he hoped to kind of get the slaves to join his cause to kind of start a revolution and overthrow slavery in the South. So he hoped that would be like the first shot to start a slave rebellion. And unfortunately, what ended up happening?
Didn't 10 men of his were killed and he was convicted of treason and sentenced to death?
Yes. So the slaves didn't join. They were kind of shocked that this was happening. And you got to think, after so many generations and years of these slaves being told by their masters, obey your master loves you, and being told through the Bible, quote, quote, the Bible, telling them that it was okay, it kind of caught them off guard. So Brown was captured and he was later executed. Right during 1860. And Abraham Lincoln had the opportunity to kind of pardon him, and he wanted nothing to do with that. He thought, well, that's kind of answering number 10, but he just thought that it was going to hurt the Republican Party, and he was wanting to kind of cater to the South. So it's crazy. It's almost like Abraham Lincoln isn't as great as our history books make him out to be. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh, so crazy.
Crazy concept. But our last discussion question, how did John Brown's raid help to further separate the North from the South? So by him attacking essentially this military base, how did that hurt North-South relations?
Did it have something to do with the election?
It did help sway the election. And think about this. Did people in the South, what did the slave owners and the elites in the South see by John Brown attacking this military base?
Didn't they see like rebellion, basically?
Yes, they saw that, okay, like a war for slavery is kind of on the horizon is what they thought. So they were under the impression, okay, these people are willing to die to overthrow all of this. So they saw that the abolitionists and the North were willing to cause a war to end slavery. So it's like everything they had was starting to crumble in front of them. So I know that we're running a little bit short on time, so I want us to go ahead and discuss this. This is what I wanted you to be able to answer your summarizer before you submitted this on Google Classroom. So it says, what were the 4 events that helped further separate the North from the South? So what 4 main events that we discussed today helped separate the North from the South? And then how did each event play a role in this separation between the North and the South? So how did each event play a role? What role did they play? Kind of like we discussed in our discussion questions. How did each of these play a role? So that's what I'm going to have you turn in for your summarizer right here. So that just has to be turned in before midnight tonight.
So you want us to turn in like all the notes or just the summarizer? So
you'll end up turning in all your notes. So you see how it assigns the same notes template for every single one of you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're able to go through and type in it and edit it as you take your notes.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're done, you just hit submit and it'll show up over here. And so that way I'm able to see that you're doing your notes and you're able to still get 20 points per notes assignment.
Okay.
So it's like, since we're not able to be in class and take notes like usual, that's what we're doing.
Okay.
So, and you do the same thing for that history of the abolitionist movement. So did anybody else have any questions about the notes from today before we cover the last thing we need to talk about?
Can you go over the Kansas-Nebraska Act?
Okay, so I'm recording this discussion that we just had over all of these, and I'm going to upload it onto the YouTube channel. We only have 3 minutes until you're technically supposed to swap over to your second period. And I want to make sure, I've got one more thing I want us to cover. So I'm going to upload that onto YouTube, and I can then Zoom with you later if there's something that you need help with specifically. Okay?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Okay. So the last thing I want us to talk about today this is an activity that's going to pop up, or it may have already popped up. So it's called the I Am Abolitionist Recorded History Activity. So the purpose of this is you're going to place yourself, you know how we did the mixer activity where you had to place yourself in the shoes of a certain person and then go have discussions with other people to kind of get other people's backstories? So we're going to do this in class. We want to be able to gain a better understanding of the role that every single different person played in bringing about the abolition of slavery. So under this, you're going to record yourself. I've assigned everybody a person. Right here are the different roles that every single person can have. And I've already assigned you your person. So like Desiree, for instance, you're Elizabeth Gloucester. So you'll just find that person's role right here. So your job is to record like a short little video of you reading that biography, but also making sure to include A, B, C, and D. It's like a 1 to 2 minute video.
Okay.
And so then once everybody uploads them, there will be some reflection questions that I will post on Monday night, or Tuesday, yeah, Monday night, that will allow you to go through and kind of get different people's perspectives. It's just kind of a last little review activity that we're going to do for the abolitionist movement. So the step-by-step instructions are right here. They're all uploaded right here. It gives you an exemplar. I recorded myself as Charles Sumner. I took that one myself because you know how I love Charles Sumner. And I will upload the abolitionist reflection questions on Monday night. But the only thing, so this is like your homework for the weekend.
Charles Sumner, Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts. I was born on January 6th.
Hold on one second. Now who's going to play that?
I was known for my powerful public.
Thank you. I'm not that narcissistic. I don't want to listen to myself that much. But so Monday night, all y'all have to do is turn that in by Monday night. So that is all I have for today. I know that was a lot to throw at you at the last minute. That's why I made sure to record this so that anybody can go back and view it if they need to. And yes, Malik, that's fine. But any other questions before we get going about anything at all?
No, just ready.